The reading from Emmett Fox is titled, God is Spirit. The sixth main aspect of God is Spirit, and we know that God is Spirit, but what does that mean? Spirit is that which cannot be destroyed or damaged. It is the opposite of matter. Matter wears out, but spirit does not, because spirit is substance. Herbert Spencer defines substance as that which is not subject to discord or decay. Webster says, that which underlies all outward manifestation, real, unchanging essence or nature, that in which qualities inhere, that which constitute anything that is. All of this can only apply to spiritual things. And from John's Gospel, chapter 4, verse 24. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. You are spirit. Spirit cannot die and was never born. Your true self was never born and will never die. You are eternal, divine, unchanging spirit in your true nature. The whole universe is a spiritual creation, but we see it in a limited way. You have sometimes seen a window made of fluted glass, and you know that if you look at the street through this window, everything will be distorted. Nevertheless, you know that the distortion arises from your seeing wrongly. Our false vision causes us to know ourselves only from a seeming birth to a seeming death. But this is illusion too. This distorted vision of spirit is really what we know as matter. Eucken says, I don't know who Eucken is, that's spelled E-U-C-K-E-N. Eucken says, reality is an independent spiritual world, unconditioned by the apparent world of sense. And this is substance. The title again is God is Spirit.
I confess, when I read that earlier this week, I didn't see how that fit with anything that Phyllis asked me to talk about, but it just hit home. This is a time of unparalleled chaos and upset. It's not that we have one issue, one source of turmoil and upset. We might say we have 5 of them, all happening at once. A commentator I read someplace recently, within the last 2 days, said that President-elect Biden is inheriting the presidency at a time when there are 4 major catastrophic crises hitting all at once. Well, Phyllis asked me to talk about how are we going to handle all this that's we're experiencing in terms of the crises. And my first thought was a joke. Change is inevitable, except from a vending machine. A confession. I'm in the middle of this crisis. I'm having a real tough time. This week, I have been grumpy as all get out. I'm an old man, so I have some right to be grumpy, but this was beyond what's acceptable. And so I don't know that I can't give you answers per se. I can share with you some of the thoughts, some of what thinkers and spiritual people I respect have to say, and perhaps some tidbits of my own. because I don't have the answers. I'm walking one foot in front of the other and doing my best to also support those of you who are in my community who are really struggling. Uh, Yesterday, I was working with one of my community members where all sorts of junk has hit the fan. Um, she's discovered that her ex-husband, when he has custody, has not been taking appropriate care of their child. She, in her primary job, has had significant income cut back. Her secondary job just is gone. She's had to give up the home that she has lived in for 10 years and move into a much less nice place. And she's trying to settle that. So it's like everything's hitting at once. And all this is triggering all sorts of emotions from the disaster that was her childhood. Chances are every one of you who's listening to me is experiencing some set of upsets, maybe triggers from old stuff, maybe triggers from what's going on. And for anyone who's listening at some time well past when I'm doing this talk, this is the week after the far right extremists tried to capture the Capitol, killed a policeman, and all that stuff. Insurrection is the common term here. So I'm going to break this into two different parts. First, how are we going to handle this as in our spiritual walk, as spiritual people? And second, some sort of foot on the ground. How are we going to handle it, period, to help ourselves get through? And corollary to that, to perhaps contribute to the reduction of this high level of turmoil, upset, and toxic energy. One of the people from Richard Rohr's contemplative community, Brian McLaren, wrote of something that speaks to me as a Quaker and reminds me also of how the Amish approach life. He said that there are three elements that we should be practicing, if you will. We need to practice the presence of God. And that is living in the presence of God, allowing ourselves, if the time to meditate, to contemplate, to connect with this divine that is within us, around us, above us, and surrounding us. And I add a subset to that, not only practicing the presence of God, but living that presence in this world. There's the old joke that the Quakers, when they came to the New World, they came to the New World to do good, and they did very well. But the key part is they came to the New World to do good. And in the Old World, they stood for what they saw as right and righteous and good, even when it might cost them. Many of them were merchants. And they concluded that since there's that spark of God in every man, woman, and child, no longer could they charge as much as each person, they could hornswoggle each person into paying, but they needed to set a fixed fee for every item in their store and charge that to everyone. And for a while, their businesses really suffered. What? They're not going to bargain with me? I'm going to go to the next store. But then, as the story was told to me by a Quaker historian, mothers in the village realized that if they needed something, they could send a child to the store, and the child would be charged the same that the mother was being charged. And if a traveler came to town, he would ask where the Quaker merchant was, because he knew he wouldn't get cheated. Well, we are in a situation here where practicing the presence of God, bringing that peace, standing for that peace. And sometimes the Quakers went to jail for that peace. I'm not saying this is necessarily going to happen to us, but we can stand lovingly for righteousness, and we can, as Gandhi did, stand gently for what is right and speak truth to power out of love. And at the end of this talk, I may have some more to say on that. McLaren also says that we need to practice the presence of others. Another way of looking at this is the importance of building and maintaining and being actively a part of a caring community. This can be family, but it doesn't need to be. Ideally, it's broader than that. Now, in this COVID times, that may mean being in connection by Zoom. A day or two ago, a friend told me that the breakfast meetings that their church had been having, it's a Mennonite church, and they do emphasize community. It was men's breakfasts. The women have their own women's breakfasts too. Uh, uh, well, they hadn't been able to meet. And then someone suggested that they have breakfasts over Zoom. So now, every Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, each person shows up on Zoom with their breakfast, and they're still able to maintain the community of talking, sharing, praying together, caring together. That is practicing the presence of others. And then finally, McLaren says we must practice the presence of oneself. What good is it to carry the other two if we are beat down, if we allow ourselves to be beat down, if we're not caring for our own spiritual walk, if we're not caring for our physical and emotional well-being? And this is something I've got to take a look at because clearly I'm beat down right now. So think of these as 3 queries to start each day out during this time of unprecedented emotional upheaval, statewide political upheaval, spiritual upheaval, hatred, so many kinds of hatred, and so much fear. Ask yourself each morning, have I practiced the presence of God in the last 24 hours? What do I need to do today to assure that I do? Maybe it's just some meditation time. What am I doing so I'm practicing the presence of others and with others? And what do I need to do today? That's question number 2. Question number 3, how am I caring for myself? How am I making myself present to myself? And yes, I will send these 3 queries out to you this evening after we're done. Now, here's one quote. It was from the internet and I couldn't figure out what belief pattern or who it came from, but it's worth thinking of. At all times, setbacks and trials are what we need in our spiritual life and are God's greatest love and salvation for us. So we can take it that this is probably from a Christian source. Through experiencing them, we can realize our impurities in our belief in God, and moreover, understand that these unfortunate events befalling us do not mean that God has abandoned us. Instead, regard it that God is purifying and perfecting us. And then, I believe this one was from Emmett Fox. No matter how devastating, irreversible, or hopeless things seem when you're facing a major setback or a life-threatening situation, you can choose to continue to actively trust in Jesus and refuse to let go of that abiding trust. Faith isn't the absence of fear. Faith is what overcomes fear. Another one, I'm not clear where it came from. It can be pretty scary when you're in a bad situation and you can't see any natural way out of the dilemma. But that's when faith comes to the fore. You have to keep believing and trusting no matter what things look like. And then from Emmett Fox again, You have to keep walking on the solid ground of what God has told you to do in spite of dire circumstances, knowing that no matter how hopeless it looks or how bad things get, Jesus has you in his arms. You may feel afraid of what you're facing. You may not see anything you can do to fix the situation you're in, but God's intervention in your life isn't based on your self-confidence. It's based in your belief in him and your trust in his unlimited power, goodness, and love. You just have to believe that God can bring about what is best in his time and his way. And if not in this life, in the life to come, because you trust him. Faith knows what is most important to know. God will never leave you nor forsake you. The art of life is to live in the present moment and to make that moment as perfect as we can by the realization that we are the instruments and expression of God himself. And then another from Emmett Fox. If only you could love enough, you would be the happiest, the most powerful being in the world. Do it trembling if you must, but do it. So, in terms of the spiritual aspect, anchor yourself in faith. Change is inevitable. Faith is the anchor with which you can get through it, the anchor that can, if you will, help you stand in the midst of a flood of change, an avalanche of change. And then there was this morning, a response from Dr. Andrea Bonar, a psychotherapist who does a column. Someone who wrote in asking if she was an alcoholic because with everything happening this month, she found herself tending to be drinking more. And what Bonar said, the essence was, the alcohol isn't the big issue, you may or may not be, but the issue is, what coping mechanisms do you have, are you using? And she goes on to say, whenever we are one-trick ponies in terms of what we use to manage difficult emotions or to persevere through challenging times, it's a problem. You need a variety of things to help you through the hard stuff in life. And the more one takes over and becomes your automatic first through last strategy, the more important it is to add some more. I don't know how many of you have read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He was a survivor of, I believe it was Auschwitz, one of the death camps. His wife was killed in it. And he was a psychotherapist, ultimately a quite famous one. And what he tried to do, had to do for himself, and then in his psychotherapy with survivors of things like the death camps, was give them a reason, a hope, the strength to carry on. And Rabbi Harold Kushner, who wrote, among other things, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, did a foreword to one of the volumes. He wrote this: the greatest task for any person is to find meaning in his or her life. And the task before us in this time of tumult, I'm adding this part in, is to figure out how we fit, to not feel like we're just cast adrift in it. So Kushner goes on, Frankl saw three possible sources for meaning: in work, doing something significant; in love, caring for others or another person; and in courage through difficult times. Suffering in and of itself is meaningless. We give our suffering meaning by the way in which we respond to it. And it goes on to say, Forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation. So this is especially important if any of you listening to me are feeling hopeless or helpless in this. He goes on to say, you cannot control what happens in your life, but you can always control what you will feel and do about what happens to you. And then Richard Rohr had in an article, no, actually it was a video, and this just struck me. He said the demonic is meaninglessness.
Mhm.
So that fits so well with what I just read from Kushner and Frankel. Remember, the demonic is meaninglessness. So do not let yourself be carried away in meaninglessness. I have read enough and talked with enough people who are, shall we say, whiling away their time watching 7 and 8 and 10 hours of television a day, binge watching Netflix or whatever, things like that. That's, if you will, the demonic, the toxic. Now, Rohr comes from the Catholic tradition, so I don't go quite with the same demonic level as he does. But let us take the demonic as the uselessness of existence. The toxic of existence is meaninglessness. And those of you who joined early heard Phyllis talking about how several of our people combined together to help Muhammad go from certain eviction, homelessness, and suicidal ideation to finding a place, finding support, giving him the courage that he actually found a job. And now he emails back to Phyllis and also to Laura, and I don't think she's here tonight. The two people he knows has had personal contact with, who helped him. He's keeping in touch, letting us know how things are going, and he is so grateful. Each of us can choose to have that sort of meaningfulness, even while we're home doing Zoom. I'd give Janet and Ann a tip of the hat there, because several times they have helped out, even though they are sequestered at home, with things like the 2 dinners that we hosted here. They saw to it that we had some funds to do it, or they sent some food to us to share with everyone. There are many ways. Do not think that you have no way of contributing, no way of being meaningfully supportive to those who are hurting. Even if it's just in your meditation, sending out loving prayer, loving lifting up to the whole world. That's something I do in my prayer now, is at some point, I put in what I see as an envelope of peace around the entire world, a sort of white light envelope. Now I do other things too. Being a minister, I'm always on call, but that's one thing I can do for the whole world as part of my trying to help the world, the universe, move to a higher frequency level on the Hawkins scale. Now, on a more practical level, or a practical level, the Reverend Evan Harris in a local newspaper. Google is wonderful. I Google something, I find all these interesting things. He was writing about the same situation, but in terms of personal crisis. And he said something that reminded me. He said, it's actually more cathartic to laugh at a situation, and even to be laughing at ourselves. And to laugh at ourselves in our situation is actually a spiritual practice. He goes on to say, I feel closer to God when I imagine God laughing with me at my situations, my over-seriousness, and my faulty internal logic. And then he goes on to say, Buddhists speak of the 2 arrows in life that strike us. The first arrow is the pain of the situation itself. And the second arrow is the pain of our reaction to the first arrow. We must all bear the first arrows. We will get hit. That's part of change, part of going on in life. We can often learn to avoid the second arrow by being grounded in faith, by being flexible, and by figuring out what to do. Now, he also goes on to be clear, laughing isn't appropriate to every circumstance, but use it like all tools when it's actually helpful or needed in a given situation. No, I don't think I'd laugh if my nail gun sent a nail through my foot into the floor.
Right.
Phyllis didn't like that one. Norman Cousins, this article reminded me, wrote a whole book about when he was saddled with a terminal illness. They couldn't figure out what to do. They were just had him in bed waiting to die. And so he decided he was going to spend his time laughing. He got a video player into the hospital and all the Marx Brothers movie, and he watched 4 or 5 hours of Marx Brothers every day, laughing uproariously. And to quote Mark Twain, the illness got discouraged and it went away. Now, there's another side angle here that Richard Rohr mentions. He says, we need to acknowledge there's grace in the difficulty, in the fall, as well as the grace from getting up from the fall. And the grace of the fall and the grace of getting up are inseparable. But we almost never, he says, want to acknowledge grace in the falling part. Well, let us take the turmoil, the upset, the angst, the hatred, the general toxic energy, and on a Hawkins scale, the under 250 out of 1,000 energy, and treat that as the fall. And I don't know how we will acknowledge grace, but let's say there's grace in the experience of being in it, sort of like a negative baptism, perhaps. But let us also look forward to the grace of emerging from it ourselves and helping the world too, as we lift ourselves up in God's love, in the loving vibrations towards the ultimate goal of 1,000 on the Hawkins scale. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, David Hawkins' Power versus Force is the book. Do read it. Now, Carolyn Hawks, the agony columnist today, had a similar question: what to do, how to keep going. And she had this wonderful piece. There's no single code for how to keep going. There is only whatever works. And that can mean even just staggering from day to terrible day, food, work, sleep, until things change, because things will change. They always do. Now that's resilience. Things will change. They always do. We'll all get through it if we choose. That's resilience. Obviously, she says a daily stagger isn't ideal. So install it as your minimum only. The I can do this floor that you know you won't fall through. And that frees you to put better things on top of the daily minimum. She goes on to say, also, give yourself permission for small, even tiny treats, luxuries, at least once a day. A hot bath, a click through old photos, tea, a TV show, a hug. It can be anything except random. Schedule it. A trail of breadcrumb-sized anticipations will get you through almost anything. So what you've seen here and what I presented is the problem, how to anchor spiritually against the uncertainties, the upsets, the toxic energy, and some concrete steps to help you on the way as you move through this and move toward what Churchill called the broad sunlit uplands. You have support. This is a wonderful community for support. Any one of us will be glad to walk with you, to support you, to talk with you, to help you lift yourself up. That's what this church is about. That's what these services are about, is even though we're different, we all support. Even though we're different, we all care about each other. Even in political things, I'm sure there are differences, but we can still care for each other. It's that kind of spirituality that makes this church and our community so special. I'm glad each of you is here as part of it. I'm glad we're here to pray together on Sundays. Do not doubt that any single thing each of us does adds to the lifting up of the totality of this world, be it prayer, be it physical activities such as the community getting together to help Muhammad, something each of you can do. About a week ago, I read about a youngster, I don't remember what town, but it was a metropolis someplace on the East Coast, who read that there were more and more homeless people, and the shelters weren't able to take them all, so a lot of them were going hungry. So with his mom's help, he started spending his savings going to the store and getting bread and peanut butter, and I assume sandwich baggies, and he would make 20 or 30 or 40 bread and peanut butter sandwiches, and then in the evening, he and his mother and father, or some combination there, would go down to where the homeless were and they'd hand them out. Now, in the scheme of things, that's not big. You know the old story of the starfish who were stranded on the beach, and this little kid who was walking along the beach picking him up, throwing him back into the sea so they'd survive. And this little old timer saw him doing and say, "Hey, kid, what you doing?" "Oh, I'm throwing these starfish back so they don't die." "Well, look at all the starfish. You're never going to save them all." "Yeah," says the kid, picks up one, throws it, "but I just saved that one." Don't be overwhelmed by the hugeness of all the problems. Just do what you can. And a sidebar from that, with all the political hatred going on, I think of the Quakers who believed in speaking truth to power. And I recently, just in the last 2 days, read articles from people who are specialists in extremists. Don't hesitate not to argue with people who believe that the election was stolen, that it was right to have an insurrection, but let them know that you don't agree. The experts are clear on that. Let them know you don't agree, period. I have been asked to do the benediction by our service leader today. Dear God, help us as we navigate this uncertain time. Help us put the pieces of our personal jigsaw puzzle together in the right way, the best possible way, for us to be of service to you, of service to ourselves, of service to this earthly place. We thank you that you allow us this time as a community to share, to care, to love, to heal together. Thank you for having brought us here originally, for enabling us to join each other on a regular basis, and for watching over us as we depart from here, seeking to walk in you at all times and serving you at all times. And thank you for guiding us back here to share, to care, to love, to heal one another, and all together to serve you and this earth. We give you all gratitude and all thanks for the good that comes about. We say thank you, thank you, thank you. And we all say,
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.